Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. I wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of fan service and some of its other impacts on storytelling today. This discussion is really prompted by the movie Spider-Man No Way Home, or more accurately, by the way people were talking about it in general. A lot of people talked a lot about the amount of fan service or nostalgia bait in this movie. And I think that a lot of what I have heard has been very oversimplified. Big surprise, it's the internet era, people like sound bites. There's going to be a lot of oversimplifying. But I think it's useful for a storyteller to try and unpack some of these ideas and consider what all they mean and the connotations behind them so that you can have those metrics in mind as you write a story. That said, I do want to start at the extreme end as we begin to think about using previous stories to shape and influence current stories. And the most extreme version of this is fan service. Fan service is a real thing that happens. It's where you include a piece of previous storytelling in a totally gratuitous way just to draw attention and get people excited and say, look at that. That's the thing I remember. Now, there's a lot of debate over what is and is not fan service, and part of the purpose of this video is to unpack that a little bit. But I want to start with an example that is pretty clear and unambiguous fan service. And since No Way Home is the inspiration for this discussion, I'm going to try and use examples entirely from that movie. And our example for clear and blatant gratuitous fan service is going to be Norman Osborn saying, "I'm something of a scientist myself." This line is a very typical kind of fan service. It is originally taken from the 2002 Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, where Norman Osborn, also played by William Dafoe, introduces himself to Peter and, in kind of a self-depreciating way, equates their interest in science. Peter is, of course, a high school student who studies science a lot because it's really interesting to him. Norman is a world-famous scientist who runs a multi-million-dollar corporation. But Peter is friends with Norman's son. Norman is trying to relate to him and be a good dad, even though he's not that great at relating to people or being a dad. It's a very charming moment. William Dafoe delivers the line with a lot of humor and good character, and the framing of the line and the way it's delivered give us insight into Norman Osborn and who he's going to be over the course of this movie. The line also lives on in mimetic infamy. The screenshot has been taken and recaptioned to make William Dafoe an astrophysicist or a brony or a confident jerk or any number of other things. It's pretty memey, it's a good template, and it's one of the things that has helped that movie to live on over the years. So even though Norman delivering it in Spider-Man No Way Home serves no real purpose to illustrate his character or to establish a rapport between himself and Peter when Norman says it to Peter in No Way Home, there is still a thrill for longtime fans of the Sony Spider-Man movies in hearing him say that. That is gratuitous fan service. It's a little bit of something old put into something new, expressly to excite fans. And usually without any kind of functional impact on the story or on the situation, and often to its detriment. I would say in this particular situation, we managed to avoid having any kind of negative impact from putting this moment of fan service in beyond it being awkward and clunky, but it is still awkward and clunky. And in my book, that makes this pure fan service. A step away from fan service is nostalgia. Nostalgia is just counting on the audience's fond memories of an old story to make them a little more receptive to the story you are telling now. The simplest form of nostalgia is simply franchise loyalty. You could say that every Spider-Man movie banks a little bit on nostalgia because you're counting on people who read Spider-Man comics in their youth to be at least part of your audience. The fact that they are already familiar with your franchise and the basic beats of the story help them get invested a little bit faster than they might have otherwise, and certainly buys you some goodwill to be a little bit more experimental than you might otherwise be. No Way Home plays its nostalgia cards very carefully. Obviously, it brings back the other two actors who have played Spider-Man to reprise their roles, and that is a banking on nostalgia, but they also bank on nostalgia in their selection of the villains they bring back. William Dafoe's Green Goblin, Alfred Molina's Doc Ock, these are very well-respected villains from the original Raimi trilogy. Now, Sandman is there as well, but he doesn't play as big a part. But it's noteworthy that neither Hobgoblin nor the Raimi Venom are present in this movie because they were not particularly well-received. They were not particularly fondly thought of villains from the Raimi trilogy. By the same token, we don't see the Amazing Spider-Man's take on the Goblin character, nor do we see their take on Rhino. Electro and Lizard Man were not particularly well thought of as villains, but they were pretty memey, and memes have value as nostalgia in and of themselves. So I think Sony was able to effectively leverage that, turn them into interesting antagonists for the purpose of this movie. What separates this nostalgia value from true fan service is that the story is purpose-built to focus on these characters. They are not gratuitous. They do not make the story more awkward, outside of some of the interactions necessary with Doctor Strange in order to get them there in the first place. That prevents this nostalgia grab from elevating to the level of fan service. Yes, the storyteller is relying on some audience goodwill and good memories of other stories to get them invested in their current story. But you're always relying on some kind of a hook to get the audience interested in your story. And I don't see why nostalgia should be any better or worse than action, or character, or setting, or plot. All of these things can be very cheap and gratuitous ways to grab the attention, or they can be very well thought out, very thoroughly implemented, very skillfully executed ways to grab the audience attention. And the value of the technique is not in what it is, but in how it is performed. Now, there's an argument to make that in mishandling Doctor Strange in the way Spider-Man No Way Home does, they are poorly implementing nostalgia as a technique. And I agree, that is a valid criticism of the movie. I think the writing around Doctor Strange and pretty much the entire first act of Spider-Man No Way Home is atrocious. But the second and third acts go to such great pains to tell a good, well-driven story that incorporates these elements of nostalgia that I can't really say that the nostalgia itself was the storytelling technique that failed. I would say the flaw is more in managing conflict than it is in setting up nostalgia. That's a pretty broad topic, which is outside the scope of what I want to talk about here, so I'm just going to leave it there, and maybe we'll come back and talk conflict management in another video. Finally, beyond nostalgia, there is simple continuity. Some people have referred to having moments like Maguire's Peter Parker referencing the way he defeated Doc Ock or Green Goblin as nostalgia bait. That is simply stupid. The writers are trying to tell a story that directly continues the story told in the Raimi films and in the web films. You cannot tell a story that directly follows another story by pretending like that story did not exist. There has to be continuity between those stories. Otherwise, you are just creating standalone stories. And I'm sorry, but having the other Peter Parkers refer to previous adventures and the insights they drew from the things they did during those adventures is just continuity. It's not nostalgia. It's not fan service. It's just good storytelling. Probably the thing that has annoyed me the most is seeing people confuse continuity with nostalgia. Stories have to have a consistent internal narrative in order for most audiences to get invested in them. It is totally crazy to try and pretend that just keeping the beats of a narrative straight over the course of your narrative is some kind of attempt to appeal to a gratuitous part of fan culture is going to be the death of storytelling if this keeps up. No, it is not bad to remember what was written in the past and make sure it has real, significant impacts on stories in the present. That is how you tie the stories together, and it is important to tie stories together that are supposed to share a continuity. You don't have to share continuity. The great conversation can work in ways other than having one long, epic narrative overspanning everything. Cough DC, cough MCU. I'm looking at you guys. You really don't always need to do that. But if you are trying to do that, then you have to pay attention to continuity, and you cannot condemn those storytellers for attempting it. All in all, I think that Spider-Man No Way Home does a pretty good job of juggling continuity and nostalgia and only lapsing into fan service in the most harmless and inoffensive of ways. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of fan service here and there. It is important to keep your most invested and excited fans invested and excited. That is what is going to give your story the legs to get through its low periods. And every story has its low periods. So, while I feel a little bit of fan service goes a long way, I don't think there was anything particularly egregious in what they did in Spider-Man No Way Home. And having a story that is all about celebrating previous stories and using them to build up the future of your current story is by no means bad. I think that Spider-Man No Way Home handles its nostalgia theme very well and puts a great capstone on all of the Spider-Men that we've seen so far. By showing such a commitment to continuity, they really told us that all of the time we have spent watching these movies, assuming you've watched all of them, I didn't watch Amazing Spider-Man 2, but the time we have put into watching those movies is respected by them as they are telling us additional stories. And that's a pretty important thing if you want to keep the investment and interest of your audience. All in all, really good work on the nostalgia and continuity fronts here. I hope that in the future we will see a little more nuance in discussing incorporating the past and love for previous stories into modern storytelling, because I do think it is an important tool in the storyteller's toolkit, and we're never going to get good at using it unless we really study what is good and what is bad about it. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. Let me know your favorite fan service Easter egg in Spider-Man No Way Home in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.